So now that we've listed polls, we want to first of all get the general poll information and display this here. So we're just going to output the poll question here and then look after that at dealing with outputting the particular choices relating to this poll. So let's stay on this page, poll here. We've got all the information that we need to actually replace. So we've done our markup. Now's the time to actually start to create the queries. So let's close off index and let's close off inix. We don't really need that anymore. And under poll.php, let's start to make this a little bit more dynamic. So at the top, we want to obviously require in our initialization file. So I'm going to do a require once on app init.php. And then down here, we're going to start to do a few checks. The first thing we need to check is if the actual poll ID has been specified. Because if we just go through to poll.php, we need a poll ID to be able to display poll information. Simple as that. And the reason we get an error here is because of this. So inside of the condition, we basically want to check if something isn't set, and that something is the $_get superglobal and the poll key. That basically means this here. We've called this ID when we probably should have called it. Let's just refactor this. Poll. You can leave it as ID as you want, but I think poll is a little bit more descriptive. So let's just go back to the index and click on one of these. So we've now got poll equals 1. So we want to make sure that's set. If it's not set, all I'm going to do is just redirect back to the index page. There's probably better ways to actually structure moving around your application. This is probably not the best one, but for now, just because we're learning, we can just get away with doing a header redirect. You may even want to display a message saying can't find that poll, or please specify a poll ID or something like that. Anyway, otherwise we have this key available, this key in this value in this key here, so we can just store that. So I'm going to say ID equals $_get poll, like that. Now, because we're going to be outputting this to the page, and we are going to be using prepared statements, and we'll talk about them later when we actually query. In this case, we may want to output the poll ID, and we're going to actually do that further down the page inside of the form. So what we want to do is make sure that this is cast to an integer, and that just involves adding this at the start of this variable. And that basically means that no text can be included in here or anything. So we're sort of safe to output this to the page pretty much. So what we want to do now is get general poll information. So I'll just put a little comment here, get general poll information. And this involves preparing a statement, selecting specific information that we need, and then executing that and grabbing the object back. So it's pretty much all like we've done with the query, but we're going to be using prepared statements. So I'm going to call this poll query, and this is going to be db, and this time we're going to use the prepare method, not the direct query method. And let's pull this down just for readability. So we're going to select ID question from polls, but this time we want to select it where the ID matches the ID that's been supplied here. So we say where ID equals, and then we give a placeholder. So we use a colon and then a name identifying the placeholder. What you might usually be used to doing, or if you've not learned before, sometimes you would just insert the ID like this. If this wasn't escaped, and if this was a query, you've opened yourself up to SQL injection, which is a little bit beyond the scope of this video. Either way, we're going to prepare this statement, which we've done here. Remember, we still need the between poll starts and poll ends. So we're going to say and date now between, let's do that in caps, between starts and ends, just to make sure that we're not trying to be, no one's trying to access a poll that doesn't yet or hasn't yet started. So what we're going to do now is down here, we're going to execute that. So we say poll query execute. No need to reassign this to a variable like we've done here. Now, inside of execute, we create an array. Depending on which PHP version you're using, by the way, you might want to use this array, but I'm using a version that supports short syntax. And here we need to specify the value for the placeholders that we've given in the prepared statement. In this case, it's just poll. So here we're going to say poll, and that's going to contain the value ID here. So this is just as good as saying ID equals 1. That's pretty much what this is doing. So now what we want to do is store this in a variable called poll, which we can use throughout our page. And I'm going to say poll query, and that's going to fetch object. We've already seen this method in use on the poll index page. So we've now got this poll information. Let's actually just do a print R on poll like so. And let's go ahead and refresh. And there we go. What do you think of the new website? That's a poll 1. Let's just switch this over to poll ID of 2. And there we go. We get the do you like polls information. So we've got this information. So we now know that we can actually output this down here. So let's do that now. So we're going to say PHP and let's say echo poll question like that. So let's refresh here and there we go. Do you like polls? And what do you think of the new website? Now just a little bit of advice or a little bit of warning. I'm not escaping anything that's being outputted. If your data in your database is being inserted by, in fact, even if it's not, you should escape on output. I'm not going to cover that really in this video because to escape properly is a little bit beyond the scope of this. But whenever you're outputting anything stored in a database, make sure you escape it. So please bear that in mind and go ahead and research into properly escaping with PHP. So we've got our poll question here. We've output our poll question. But what happens if a poll doesn't actually exist? Remember, we're checking whether this isn't available and we're redirecting to index.php. But what if it's poll ID of 3? Well, in this case, what we're doing is we're generating an error here because we're trying to access a property that doesn't exist from this poll variable here. So we need to create some kind of check down here to check if that poll actually exists or not. So we'll do this before we even start to generate this markup here. There's no need to do that otherwise. So we're going to open up a PHP tag and close a PHP tag, and we're going to say if not poll. Then down there we're going to do something, and then otherwise we want to output all of this, and then down here we want to do an end if. And we'll just indent this as well. So if the poll doesn't exist, we're just going to say that poll doesn't exist, like so. And when we refresh, there we go. So poll 2 works still, and poll 1 works. Excellent. So we've done that, but we now want to output the actual questions, the choices rather, sorry, because we've got our list of hard-coded choices here, but that's not really good enough. So what we want to do now is we want to get all of our poll choices. And we need to do this down here. We need to do a couple of checks later on once a user has actually voted. But let's just output the choices first of all. So down here, we're going to say get poll choices. And we need to do another query here. So we say poll query, or we could probably say choices query. That might make a little bit more sense. So choices query. And this is again a prepared statement because we're going to be inserting variables into this. So we're going to say select. Now this is going to be a little bit different because what we're going to be doing is we're going to be joining the choices table, the polls choices table. We can't just pull from the polls table because this doesn't contain the choices. So we need to join these on. It sounds a little bit more difficult than it actually is, but follow along and it should make a lot of sense. So what I'm going to do is when I select now, I'm going to explicitly define the table name. So polls.id, so I want the ID of the poll. Polls choices.id as choice ID. And this basically means from the polls choices table, grab me the ID. But because ID and ID exist together, we are going to have a duplicate key here. So we're going to just call this choice ID. What we also want to select here is the name of the choice. So polls choices.name. So we are selecting this ID here, we're selecting this ID here, and this here. But MySQL has no idea where this is coming from. It doesn't know that we have a polls choices table joined where the ID here matches the poll field here. Because remember, this equals this. So we need to join that table on. But first we're going to select that from polls, but then we're going to join on the separate table. So we're going to do a join polls choices, and we need to say which field match which to be able to join that data. And we use the on keyword for that, and we say polls.id. So the ID here matches this poll field on the polls choices table. So polls.id equals polls choices.poll. And then we're going to say where polls.id equals poll. And we also again need this. So we'll just copy and paste that there. But this time we need to use the and keyword because where and. And then we're going to say polls.starts and polls.ends. Alternatively, you might want to do just one of these checks up here and then, later on. But I'm just going to include these in here anyway, just for clarity. So hopefully that makes sense. Remember, we're selecting from two different tables and we're joining them on the fact that these two match. And we're doing an inner join here. So we have left joins, inner joins, etc. So we want to execute this and we'll actually check if it worked. So poll query execute. And inside of here, again, we have our array and poll is going to be ID, much like we did. Oops, we've done this on the wrong page. Excellent. So let's move this over to here. There we go. So we know what we mean. We've got this executed again. We're inserting the ID here. Brilliant. So let's go ahead and just refresh here. It looks like we don't have any errors, which is good. So let's do a print R on poll query fetch object just to see what's come back. We'll only get one result back here. And we get, oops, let's do, choices query, like that. There we go. So we should now get just one choice back. There we go. So we get the first choice within that table, within that choice for each one. If we were to do a loop on that, we would get all of them. So what we can actually do is extract the choices and put them into their own array. So let's do that now. So let's extract the choices. And we do another while loop, much like we saw on the index page. So we assign each fetched object to a variable called row, and we say poll query fetch object, and then we assign these to an array called choices, like so. So now, when we do a print R on choices, and we can actually wrap these in pre-tags like so, then we will find we get the following. Okay, so let's check that out. Again, that needs to be choices query. I'm sure you spotted that. So there we go. So we've got three choices as we'd expect. We've got the ID, which is the ID of the poll. We don't really need this, to be honest. We've got the choice ID, which we know, and then we've got the name of the choice. So we can now actually loop through these and output them down here where the options are. So we're getting a little bit closer to this being complete. So let's get rid of this here and let's go down and we'll actually output these. So we obviously need to check if there are actually any choices available first of all, because if there aren't, there isn't any point in actually outputting them. So what we want to do is just above the form, because there's no point of even having a form otherwise, we want to do a little bit of a check, and we want to say if not empty, and we want to check if the choices are not empty. We want to create this form. Otherwise, let's just indent that. We want to end if there. So if there are no choices, we want to say there are no choices right now. That's probably very rare, but in the case you do launch a poll that doesn't have any choices attached, the user will just get this message. Now let's just take a look at this. So let's maybe create a poll 3 that obviously doesn't exist at the moment. Let's create that inside of here. So we'll just say this is a test poll, and let's go ahead and start that now. I'm going to end that now and just alter the date in here. Okay, so that's our poll, and you can see that we don't get the form, we get the message that we just output. Okay, so we've covered that. Let's go back to poll 2 and let's output these choices, because we know that these choices now exist, or these options now exist. So inside of here, we've got a polls options div, and we want to get rid of these, and we want to loop on this. So here we do for each choices as choice, and we obviously end our for each just there, and we indent that. Okay, so now things get a little bit more complicated, not too complicated. Remember, the value here relates to the actual choice ID. So we can just output this here. We've already seen an example of this. So choice, and remember we call that choice ID. This ID here basically just needs to be an incrementing number from 1 to however many choices there are. So in this case, we just need to output the index of this loop, or this array, sorry. So in this case, we just say index choice. So here, instead of that hard-coded 1, we can echo the index. And that will just mean that for each loop, this will be 1, 2, 3, 4. And we do the same for this here. So they basically match up the choices. So again, echo index. Now, obviously, what's left to do is actually output the choice itself. So here, remember, this is choice name, like so. So when we refresh now, we've got the actual choice name here. But if we inspect this, you'll also see that we have, if we just pull this up, we've got for each poll option C0, because arrays are 0 indexed, we've got a value of 4 for I love polls. So that relates to I love polls ID of 4, so we know which choice to assign to that user. We've got a value of 5 here, C1, and we should have C2 here, and the value of 6 there. So this all looks like it's sort of working together. The only thing we need to do now is replace the poll ID on this hidden field here. So let's go ahead and do that now. Here we just need to replace this with, now what we can do is we can either take it from up here, which we escaped, or we could take it directly from this choice array, because we know that for each choice, or for the choices, we have this available. For now, just to keep things simple, I'm going to echo the ID up here. Might look a little bit confusing, but there we go, it does the job. So if we just view the page source to make things easy, we've now got a poll with the ID of 2, as well as our options that we've already seen. There we go. Let's switch to poll 1 just to check it, and there we go. Everything looks cool. So that's basically, we've outputted everything. Now what we need to do in the next part is focus on the actual ability to click on submit answer and actually cast a poll vote.